Um, well, this is about rubrics, so I'm going to focus especially um, on advantages of different types of rubrics. So I'm assuming that you've heard about rubrics before. You have a rough idea of how you would create rubrics. Maybe you've worked before in your courses with rubrics. But we're going to work on how do we integrate rubrics into a course. What are advantages of different types of rubrics, and when can we use which rubrics, which type? How can we combine them for a better effectiveness, and then also what tools will help us use rubrics in practice. There was a request that I touch a little bit on AI integration. So I'll try to do that to the best of my ability to the extent that we have time. I'm going to at times perhaps rush through these slides a little bit. So please feel free at any time to slow me down. The goal is to have a bit of time both in between the slides to just demonstrate what I'm talking about, and then beyond that to give a bit of time for you to experiment with your own rubrics for perhaps 5-10 minutes at the end, and then we can share our experience with that. So here we go. Again, please stop me at any point that you want to raise either a question or add a comment or something like that. So the goal here, I have kind of three points that I like to maximize with my rubrics and courses. They should be fair, like everything else in our course. They should be helpful, and they should be efficient. So I think fair is pretty clear. We want to grade students fairly. I think it takes a bit of work to make anything helpful, really helpful for students. So we'll talk a little bit about that, how rubrics can improve helpfulness, so specifically helping students improve, right? So I think quite commonly as teachers or educators, we have this experience that we see the same kinds of mistakes or struggles recurring, and we're trying to be helpful to show students, okay, how do you get beyond this? How do you get to the next level of mastery? And not everything that we try to do sort of sticks and actually proves effective. So I'll talk a little bit about how rubrics can or maybe cannot be more helpful. And then thirdly, efficient. I think that's one point that's not talked about enough, because we have limited time, and the more time we spend on sort of busy work of sort of maintaining the systems and the traps that we set up for ourselves, the less time we have for interacting with students, for preparing for classes, for doing research, these kinds of things. So if we can make tasks efficient insofar as it's possible, then that will also maximize our effectiveness as instructors. So as a reminder, I like to so we have rubrics that have criteria, and then they have different levels of mastery. And for some types of rubrics, we have both of those. So most famously for our analytic rubrics, you've got two dimensions, right? You've got either your rows as the different criteria, and then your columns are levels of mastery, maybe, excellent, good, poor, or fair, poor, right? And then the columns would be, the rows would be, content, structure, style, bibliography, and formatting, these kinds of things. But you've got two different dimensions. And then we've got a couple of different types of rubrics that you focus only on one dimension. So we've got our holistic rubric that was talked about before, where you don't separate the criteria, but you describe how would an A paper look overall, and you just talk about everything under this one point without separating into content and style. And then you've got a single point rubric as well, which would focus on for these different criteria, it separates out the criteria, but it doesn't give you different levels of mastery. It's just this one single point to aim for each criterion. When we design our rubrics, we'll come back to this in a moment. When thinking about how how each of these can be helpful in certain situations. But just as a reminder, when we design our rubrics, start with your learning outcomes. So what is there that you're teaching in the course that you want your students to achieve? And then out of those learning outcomes, the ones that you're trying to assess or promote with this one particular assessment, those are going to drive the design of your rubric, and sort of which criteria would then assess whether students have achieved those learning outcomes. In terms of the way that we craft our criteria and our levels of the descriptions of the different levels, aim for clarity and objectivity. Also try and make sure that the language is constructive. So being encouraging, being motivating, as opposed to just sort of criticizing. By the way, this is one point when you start to try to integrate AI, whether it's ChatGPT or Bard or some of the custom the AI tools customized for education. For any of those, that's one thing to look out for, because you need to remind sometimes if you're for example using an AI tool to write maybe a first draft of a rubric for a course, remind it to be constructive and encouraging, and not otherwise when you get to these lower levels of performance, like a poor paper or even a below average paper, the AI description that it spits out can be quite harsh. All right. Here's an example of an analytic rubric. So you've got your different levels of mastery across the top. Those are your columns. And then you've got different criteria across the side. Those are your rows. So you've got style, thesis, structure. And this will help the students to know what they're aiming for on each point. And it will help you as an instructor to assess students equitably, even when perhaps you have a large stack of papers and by the end you can't quite remember how you graded the first few ones, but because you've got specific descriptions for the various levels of performance, that helps. It also helps you to avoid a situation where maybe a bad impression, like say the writing is fairly poor, or just the style is not nice. So that hopefully will not affect your grading too much of the other points. Like maybe the student has a really good thesis, or they've gotten the structure right, they just didn't write it nicely. It helps you to separate those things out a little bit, and of course it helps the students to know what to focus on in terms of making improvements. When you're just as another example, here would be a holistic rubric. Here you've got the different levels of performance, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, but you've got one description for each one. And then here would be a single point rubric. So you've got your different criteria. These are the same ones from the analytic rubric earlier, right? Style, thesis, structure, citations. We've got our style, thesis, structure, citations. But then instead of having descriptions for each level of performance, you've just got one description for what would be a good paper, right? So if a good paper, in a good paper, the style would be like this. The argument of each section is clear. Formatting is generally correct. You might have one or two mistakes in there. It doesn't have to be perfect, but a good paper would be one where formatting is generally correct, right? And then as you give feedback to each student, you can fill in the left or the right column, right? In this case, the student actually goes beyond this. The formatting is absolutely perfect. Every comma is in the right place. But then maybe the thesis is below the standard, and then you would use the other column for areas that need improvements to meet standards. This is a way to use the advantages of a rubric in a way, in the sense that you separate out the criteria, but you have a little bit more freedom to give written feedback, give detailed feedback. So one of the questions to ask then, where in your course would you use what types of rubrics? And I've just listed a couple of common scenarios that I've encountered in my courses. It'll be probably different in your courses, but it's a starting point. And these are graded or sort of sorted from the ones that are most frequent and small assessments to the ones that are bigger assessments that perhaps only happen once at the end of a course, or once but stretched out over a large part of the course. So ongoing classwork, this is the thing that happens in your class, in each class session, right? So when I assess participation or activities that we do in the classroom, where appropriate, I do try to have rubrics for those so that also is transparent and students know how they're being assessed. But for those kinds of rubrics, right, if a student says something, maybe whatever they're saying in class is 30 seconds long, I can't go, I can't start filling out a rubric with different columns. I'm just going to write down one number in my notes, and then maybe by the end of the class session, I've got a couple of different scores for that student. And that in some way is going to go to their participation grade. But it's something where I have to work extremely quickly, right? I need something that's reasonably objective, but I can't be spending a lot of time. So that needs to be it basically has to be a holistic rubric, because I'm not going to start, thinking about 2 or 3 different criteria for, every time that a student answers a question or makes, some kind of an analysis, a mini presentation, these kinds of things. They have to be fairly quick. On the other, regular homework assignments, when student is submitting homework, it is possible to spend a little bit more time thinking through those, but you still need to be very efficient, because you've got a large class and you're doing this either every week or maybe even several times a week, depending on your class structure. Then you've got stages of big projects, and finally big projects. So by big projects, I'm thinking of capstone projects or something that you do once for the entire course, say a paper, right? A lot of courses have, instead of a final exam, we'll have a paper. This could also apply to a thesis for a major or something like that, but major project, big project. And then the third one, the one before that, would be sort of the parts of that, right? So I find that a lot of students struggle to write a whole paper in one go. So what I do in my class, I have them write chapters of that paper over the course of the semester. Each time they get some feedback. Sometimes maybe they even give each other feedback on their work so far. But that would be sort of the stages, and then we've got the big project at the end. So those would be cases where, because I'm only doing that maybe once for the semester or 3 to 5 times for the semester, I've got a little bit more time, and also the students require a little bit more feedback in order to provide, in order to improve, right? So we've got situations where the rubrics can be a bit more detailed, and also we want to be able to offer more feedback compared to the things that happen all the time. So I'm going to focus on 2 examples here. For one, I have weekly reading reports. So this is the situation where maybe you've got a literature course or just anything where you're reading, say, primary or secondary literature. So it can be on any subject, really. But you're expecting some kind of written feedback to show students have read it and they have at some level thought about it. It can't be too much, because the students maybe just spent 1 or 2 hours reading the article that you assigned. And then on top of that, they have to write some kind of a review. So it can't be too big. Otherwise, they won't have time to do everything. But at the same time, it needs to be, perhaps there's something that's substantial enough, maybe 100 words to show that they've read it, they've thought about it. So in these cases, fairness, out of the 3 things I'm aiming for, right? Fair, helpful, efficient. Fairness and efficiency are especially important, I would argue. Fairness, of course, because if students are getting the impression that they're not graded fairly, they get discouraged, and then over the course of the semester, they're going to stop paying attention to this kind of assignment. Efficiency is really important, just because I'm doing this every week, right? Say there's a weekly reading assignment. If I do this every week and my class has, 30, 35, 40 students, even at the MPhil level where your classes might be smaller, you've got 10, 20, that's still something where you can't be spending 5 minutes on every single reading report, because you'll be there for hours, right? So at this point, the goal is to grade every single one in 1 minute, maybe 2 minutes, but ideally 1 minute or less. So in that kind of a situation, I'm going to use an analytic rubric, and I'll implement that on Moodle, so that I can just click on the different levels of performance, right? I'm reading something that's maybe 100 words long. Then I click on the different levels of performance. And, I have maybe just 2 or 3 criteria, and so then it's a matter of clicking on 5 or 6 different things for each reading report, and then I'll have that one done in 1 minute. And this also means that feedback can be very fast, right? The other advantage of being efficient, it doesn't just preserve your own time, allow you more time for class prep, but because the feedback is so fast, then students will be more likely to learn from it, right? If they're doing something every week, ideally, you know, you want to get feedback as instantly to them as possible, so that by the next week they can look, okay, what was the thing that I was poor on? Okay, maybe I didn't interact critically with the article. I only sort of regurgitated it. Okay, so maybe I need to think if I can critique something. Or maybe my style was bad in the last rubric. So then maybe I need to think, how can I improve my style? Maybe review my sentences, see that I've got a verb in every sentence, these kinds of things. And then beyond that, if students need more help, right, you can always, because you're always doing these every week, if any more detailed feedback is necessary on a general level, you can just give that in class, spend, 3 minutes at the start of your class. Hey, I just graded all these reading reports. Some of them were really good, but here's 2 things that I noticed that were recurring issues in your reading reports. I would really like you to not just summarize what this author is saying, but show me that you can think about it critically. Raise some question that they should have thought about that they didn't think about, or give me some point where you disagree, or at least give me some point where this author disagrees with another author, right? In some way demonstrate critical thinking, right? So this is something that you could say just in 3 minutes at the beginning of your class. And so you don't necessarily need a lot of specific feedback in each point. And then, of course, there's always going to be 1 or 2, or if you're lucky, 5 students in your class that want as detailed feedback as possible, but they can come see you in your office, they can write you an email, right? You don't need to be spending 5 minutes on every reading report just because 2 or 3 students are interested in more specific feedback. In a moment, we can talk about how you would implement that on Moodle, but for a moment, for the time being, I'm gonna press on. The second example is kind of at the other end of the extreme, where you've got a major course paper or project. By the way, just a summary here, for this kind of thing, weekly reading reports, I would recommend either an analytic rubric, because you don't need to write anything. You can just select the levels of performance, or even a holistic rubric. But holistic rubrics, I think, are only really efficient for, or really effective for the very smallest assignments. If it's a reading report with, maybe 100, 200 words, then for that, it might actually be helpful to separate, say, style, content. So I would recommend an analytic rubric for this one. For a course paper project, you've got usually several stages, at least in my experience. Course papers don't turn out great when you just have one deadline and everybody writes their paper, submits it without getting any prior guidance or feedback. So in some form, typically, what these look like in my course, that they're going to be early drafts. There's going to be some kind of feedback that they get on earlier drafts, and then at the end they submit the final draft. And I would expect that at that stage they've incorporated some of the feedback from earlier drafts. And here there's kind of a different situation depending on where you are in the course. During the semester, while students are still working on things and improving their work, hopefully, specific constructive feedback is the most important, because those are the things that will help them to fix mistakes, to improve perhaps their approach to how they structure a paper, to encourage them to think more critically. Whereas at the final stage, fairness and objectivity are most important, right? After students have submitted the final draft of their paper, they're not going to be making further improvements on that. But what they are going to be doing is that they'll look at your grade and they'll come to your office or write you an email to complain about your grade, perhaps. So at that point, it's most important to have, of course, we want to grade it fairly, but also to have some sort of objectivity where you're demonstrating, okay, these are the criteria that I graded you on. and here's how you sort of measured up on each of those. So in my experience, at the end of the course, when you're trying to demonstrate, okay, this is how I graded you, and then if students come calling, you can show them here. These are the reasons why you were scored lower on those criteria. For those things, an analytic rubric is really helpful because once again, you've got the different levels clearly specified. They can see where they fall. And so say that on structure, the goal is to have an introduction, a body that's clearly structured, and then a conclusion. And say they didn't have a conclusion in their paper, right? There's not much there. Like it's very objective. Nobody's going to be arguing about that. So you can just say, okay, you didn't have a conclusion, therefore you earned lower, your grade was lower on this assignment. So that sort of makes it a bit more objective, which helps at the end as you're heading toward submitting grades. Whereas during the semester, the grade, sure, it's relevant insofar as you're grading early drafts, but what's really more important is providing specific helpful feedback. This is how you can improve. So that for that reason, I would use slightly different rubrics depending on where I am in the semester. And of course, throughout, you need to be reasonably efficient. But if it's a major project, you will probably be spending several hours on grading these either way, depending on your class size. So you can't aim to make these as go as quickly as the smaller assignments. Once again, in a moment, we can talk about how these might be implemented specifically. There's a couple of tools that I want to mention. So the ones that I use most frequently in my work is spreadsheets. So either Microsoft Excel or Google Sheets. But of course, there's others. There's LibreOffice and these kind of things. And then, of course, there's Moodle. I strongly recommend trying out the rubrics function. When you create Moodle assignments, there's a grading function for rubrics. And it's surprisingly effective at getting your papers marked more efficiently. And the other advantage is that it shows up when students are going to submit the assignment. If you activate this, they can see the rubric there, and so it's not sort of something separate where they have to go to the syllabus or download something from somewhere to see your rubric, but it's right there. And then two others that I was encouraged to address, or one other point that I was encouraged to address in this was AI. In what sense can we be using AI to help us with our work as instructors? I have the test tube symbol here because these are experimental, right? These are not tried and tested in the same way, but we'll look a little bit at that. So one is, of course, using AI to help you create rubrics. That can work reasonably well as a first draft. You'll always need to refine it a little bit, and then beyond that, so once you're actually, my impression is that you never actually get a rubric quite right until you've graded a batch of papers with that rubric, because that's when you see, okay, these are the common shortcomings, and then you can mention those more specifically in the rubric description. And then lastly, AI tools for giving verbal feedback to students. Please do not at this stage use AI to try to actually grade student papers. That's fairly unreliable so far. Maybe that will come in 10 years or 5 or quicker than we expect. But at this point, I would try to use AI for perhaps verbal feedback, but make sure that you're assessing, insofar as you give number grades, make sure that you're doing that yourself and not passing that off to a computer. This is the last slide, and then after this, we're going to go into some specific examples of how to actually implement, how different options for implementing some of this. So continue to ask yourself, are students reading and hearing your feedback? This is really important to remember with rubrics, because we're trying to use rubrics to be helpful for students. Well, you can do the greatest and most wonderful things, whether with rubrics or with anything else. If students are not actually reading it or hearing it, then it will not make much difference. So I imagine many of us have had this experience where we spend a lot of time giving feedback on a paper, and then 2 weeks later, we ask students to submit the next draft, and it turns out that they haven't actually taken any of our suggestions into account. So the same, of course, goes for rubrics, right? If you're giving feedback with rubrics or in any way, look for ways to assess, are students actually looking at this? And if they're not, then try to find ways to encourage students to look at your feedback. Maybe mention this in class. Please look at the feedback, focus on the things that you are where you scored lower, those criteria where you scored lower, so that you can improve your grade. Maybe send emails. You can of course you can submit student feedback on Moodle, but maybe alert students to that by email, or try some other things. Something that I do for sort of major papers is I actually record a little video where I walk students through the papers, and then, okay, here's, this is your introduction, this is fine. Here, then in the body, these paragraphs, this paragraph is not really coherent. I sort of take a couple minutes just to walk a student through the paper, and then within that, I can say, okay, make sure to always also look at the rubric that I graded you on, so that you can see in more detail how you stacked up on each of the criteria. So that doesn't take terribly long. But then when I share that video via Google Drive, they're automatically going to get a notification to their email, and then they might watch that and then be alerted, okay, there's also a rubric that I should look at, right? So whatever works in your course, make sure that you're checking, are students actually reading your feedback? Because whatever, you can do the most wonderful things with rubrics, but if students are not looking at it, then it will not help them to improve. So try to be creative, obviously within the constraints that we have, given that we have a lot of courses, we have a lot of students in courses, so we're looking for efficient but effective ways to help students actually sort of take advantage of the work that we're doing for them. All right, where are students struggling to improve? I mentioned this a couple of minutes ago in the context of the reading reports, right? If you see that the same criteria, students are scoring low on the same criteria over and over and again, maybe address that in class. And maybe if you address it at the beginning of class and you realize, okay, nobody heard that, maybe try addressing it in the middle or at the end of the class. I don't know, whenever your students are most attentive. But if there's these kinds of things, so one thing that I've had a lot, so I have a lot of writing assignments, right? Introductions and conclusions, right? For some reason, a lot of my students, they just decide that, no, we don't need an introduction for this paper, or we don't need a conclusion for the paper. It seems like a very obvious thing to have, that, every paper needs to have a structure, and in the structure, there's always going to be an introduction and conclusion. But for some reason, that's a point where I've seen over and over again, students are just not doing that. So that's one of those points where then I ask myself, okay, how can I communicate this? But focus on those points of your rubric where you're seeing the most sort of struggles or the most reluctance to improve. And having a rubric, particularly if you are recording how people are scoring on each criteria, having it will make it easier to see that at one glance where our students scoring the lowest. And then finally, always ask yourself as well, how can these rubrics be improved? So particularly when you're seeing errors that keep coming up, okay, this is paragraph structure, or say coherence, right? This is a problem in maybe half of the drafts, half of the papers in this batch for this assignment. So then maybe adjust the rubric for the next time around, okay? Where in the criteria for coherence, you mentioned specifically the issue of paragraph structure, or maybe that falls in the criterion of structure, right? But when you see these issues recurring that sort of are symptomatic of a certain level of performance that you want students to improve, you can include that specifically in your rubrics, and then over time they will become more specific to the courses and to the performance that you expect in those courses. Okay, are there any comments so far or questions? What I would do next, I would.
Yeah. You talked about Moodle and can you split rubrics for adjustment and stuff.
Yeah.
So you have a sample, or maybe you can.
Yes, so there was a question about Moodle, and if we could look at a sample for Moodle rubrics, I'm going to go there next. If there's any other questions in the meantime, please share. Just give me a moment. I'm going to switch over, sharing my screen to jump into Moodle. Any other comments, perhaps from the chat, from the Zoom group?
The online participants are requested to please state their comments and questions in the chat box, and the expert will respond to that.
All right. All right, I'm gonna share my Moodle screen here. Second. Okay. So this is from a course. I'm gonna share two different things here. One is I'm just going to create an example assessment. I need to turn editing on. So this is in Moodle. This is what I would recommend trying if you haven't tried it before. Okay, I need to change how I'm sharing this. Actually, maybe I just need to go to duplicate, and then I think I just need to close down the PowerPoint. There's just an issue with making sure that the in-person participants so people online. All right. Okay, can everyone see Moodle now? I'm gonna add an activity or resource. I'm going to add an assignment here. Can everyone see that?
We can view
Perfect.
it.
Okay. So I'm just going to create a little assignment under grade. For the grading method, you can switch this to Rubric, and then that will allow you to use rubrics. I'm going to click Save and Display here. Obviously, I haven't added a description because this is just for demonstration. At this point, it's going to tell you the advanced grading form is not ready yet because we don't have a rubric, right? So we actually need to add a rubric. So here I'm going to go to define a new grading form from scratch. And it'll take me to this next screen, and here it'll have the place where I can create a rubric. So let's say this is for a reading report. I'm going to create a rubric for this. I could add a description here. But then here you've got your criteria and you've got your levels. Once again, this is for an analytic rubric. So here I'm going to add a name for my criterion. I'm going to say this is going to be content. And then I have different levels and different descriptions. So actually, let me just, to make things a little bit faster, use a rubric that I already have. Okay, I'm just gonna, okay, say I'm just gonna make this thesis instead. And then here I'm gonna say thesis is clear, significant, supported with sufficient evidence. That's gonna be worth 5 points. And then I can go over to the next point. This would be the next one. So say thesis is mostly clear, more evidence may be needed to support it or to demonstrate the significance. That's going to be slightly less. All right, I'm going to give 4 points for that. Then I keep moving, and I can add a criterion for each one. Here, thesis is too broad or too narrow. That's going to be 3 points, and so on and so forth. So then I could add another level if I wanted to. I need a level, say, below this. I would say, okay, maybe thesis is unclear or unrelated to much of the paper, and that's going to be only 2 points, right? And then I can add a criterion here. So that was for thesis. Now I'm going to add one for style, right? And then I repeat this process for style. The thing about this, so this takes a while to set up. Of course, in this case, I've got my I'm just copying something from a rubric that I already have, so this goes a bit faster. But still, the act of entering it is taking me a little bit of time, right? So far, maybe I've spent 2 minutes creating this, but you only need to do this once for the entire the entire rubric, and then you can just use the same rubric for each assessment, right? So I'm going to continue here and create this criterion for style, 3 points, and by the way, you can see at this point, because I use the points 5, 4, 3, 2 points for thesis, now when I get to style for each new level, Moodle is automatically inserting the same point number. I no longer have to change it. So that's convenient. And at that point, I'm done, right? I can, I've got these 2 criteria. I could add criteria. Usually I have at least 3, depending on the assignment. But for now, I just have these 2. There's a couple of settings here that you can look at. The most important thing is allow users to preview the rubric. Make sure that this is checked. Otherwise, students will not be able to see the rubric before submitting assignments. Usually you want them to be able to see that, so that they know what to expect and what to aim for. I'm going to save this rubric and make it ready. And at this point, you can see that that the assignment is ready. Right? Earlier, it was showing me this assignment is not ready because the rubric is not set up yet, but now it is set up. Now I'm going to just jump over to a different assignment because in this here, I don't have any student papers to grade. I want you to see what it looks like when you actually grade those papers. So I'm going to jump over to another assignment that I already did, and I'm going to click on grading this. In this case, what I've done, there's a Moodle function where you can hide student identities to make sure that when you're grading, you're not affected by what you know about these students. So it will hide the names. It will generate a random number and show you that instead. So here I have no idea which student is this. This student incidentally didn't submit the assignment, which is unfortunate. So I'm going to click on the next one instead, see what this student did. Okay, this student wrote something here. This is a book review. So it turns out they wrote 381 words. I could go ahead and read this now, and then I'm going to grade it. I'm going to say, okay, this one was too long. Because it should only be 200 words. But then for the other points, I could say, okay, you're really focused on the key issues. Now, compared viewpoints, but not very specifically. And the style was reasonably clear, but with room for improvements. Obviously, in this case, I haven't actually read that, right? So if I read it, it would take me maybe 1 extra minute, given that it's 300 words. If the student had stuck to the required length of, 1 to 200 words, then I would be able to read it maybe in 40 seconds. But either way, between reading it and assessing it, I'm going to spend about 1 minute on this paper. And then even if I have a class of, say, this incidentally is an MPhil class, so it's a bit smaller, but even if I had an MPhil class of, 20 people, I would be able to accomplish that. What I like to do in practice for this class is I tend to have this reading report due 1 hour before the class session. That gives me enough time, again, because of the efficiency of rubrics, that gives me enough time to grade all of these submissions before I go to class, meaning that in class, I already know, okay, students have read this, and I know which points maybe they missed in their reading based on the reading reviews. So it gives very, very quick feedback, both for the students and for myself. In this case, I would then, of course, if I wanted to, I could give some general feedback. I don't usually do that unless there's something very specific, again, because I need to be a bit efficient. And then I would click on save and show next, which I'm not going to do right now, of course, because this is a release.
Accumulate the total points.
Yeah, that's a good question. So how do the total points accumulate? So what Moodle is going to do is going to add these up and then and divide by the maximum possible, right? So in this case, I've given 10, 9, 9, and -1. So that would add up to 27, I believe. And then it's going to divide that by 30 because it takes the maximum. So here 10 plus 10 plus 10 is 30 plus 0 is 30. So it takes the maximum from each column. So 28 out, this would be in this case 27 out of 30, which I guess is 90%. Now you can't actually, so the way you do weights is you have to change how many points something is worth. So for example, if I went back to this and I wanted to change this rubric, say I wanted to give the thesis twice as much, it should be worth twice as much as the style because it's more important. I'm going to go here to define the rubric, and that way I can change it again. And then I would have to go to thesis. And then instead of making this 5, 4, 3, 2, I would make it 10, 8, 6, and 4. And then when it adds the points up, this is going to be worth more. The thesis is going to be worth twice as much as style. So you don't specify the weights explicitly, you do it by implicitly by the number of points.
So like total marks are 10 points.
Yeah.
So we have to like divide it according to the rubric.
So Moodle will do that automatically. So whatever you click on, right, whatever I click on here, Moodle will add those points up, and then when in the assignment, when you view all submissions, it'll show you the actual grade that it calculated based on your rubric. So there's nothing else that you need to do after clicking on save. Incidentally, we're at 150. The time has passed a little bit quicker than I had meant. Are there any other questions or comments? I'm gonna, yeah.
I'm also going to open the polling. All the participants are requested to please respond to the polling as well. And meanwhile, if you have any questions or comments, please write them in the chat box. We have none at the moment.
Okay, I'm going to add another point on AI because I was asked to touch on that. Though I'm running out of time. Sorry, Zoom is once again covering up my controls. Oh, there we go. So you've got there's a couple of tools that are sort of marketed towards education that you might try out. So two that I was alerted to is this clickup.com. If you log in here, I believe this is free. And then the other one that I looked at was Magic Tools, which is not free. You just get a free trial for a while. Magic School is a bit more specific. So for example, here they have they have a rubric generator that you can try. Again, this is not actually free. I just signed up for a free trial, which is only 14 days, so not particularly helpful. You can enter some information about your assessment, and then it'll generate a rubric for that. And the other point is one was here, clickup.com. That one I believe stays free. It's a little bit less customized to education, but up here you can click on the AI button, and then you need to type, for example, rubric, and then it'll tell you something about rubrics. And you can use this just like any other chat AI, right? Just like ChatGPT. Then you would have to tell it here in this box to that you want to create a rubric for a class, and you specify it. And then of course there's our good old friend ChatGPT, where you can always ask for a rubric. As a general note, so all of these, of course, there's a couple of AI models like ChatGPT, GPT-3, GPT 3.53, and GPT-4. Then there's what was it, Bard? So there's like 2 or 3 out there that are common, and then all these other tools that are geared towards education. In some way, they're going to build on those because it's incredibly easy to use, say, the ChatGPT APIs. You can, almost anyone with just minimal development experience can build a website that leverages AI in that, and that's why you have these tools sprouting up like mushrooms. But at the end of the day, what you get is sort of the same algorithm, just with some additional sort of prompt engineering built on top of it, and a fancy user interface. So almost always you can get the same results or similar results just by using the normal AI chat with either ChatGPT or Bard or whichever one you like to use. The other point that I would like to make here is you can use AI a little bit to generate verbal feedback. I'm just going to show an example here. So I had all these literature reviews actually generated or created that I was going to use for some reason this is not the latest version. Okay, you can use I'm going to try to reopen this. You can use to some extent AI with generating feedback. So here, for example, I have a prompt. Please help me provide verbal feedback on student papers. The question is a draft of a literature review, and I'm giving it here the rubrics, which is just sort of the basic expectation for style, for thesis, secondary sources, and structure. I'm telling that to the AI, and then I've got, okay, for one specific paper, here are the scores that I gave. Again, these are scores that I assigned, so please don't try getting your AI to grade something for you. Do that yourself. But once you have the scores that you assigned, I can tell those, okay, here are the scores. Obviously, I'm not giving any names here, so privacy is maintained. In a moment, I'll give you a draft based on the scores and on the draft. Please provide some verbal feedback to the student, right? So I'm going to go ahead and copy this. Then I'm going to jump over to my ChatGPT. And once again, Zoom is covering up my thing, but I'm going to just enter that yet. At the end here, I always like to say, don't start yet. Otherwise, ChatGPT or any AI is very quick to start writing a big essay, just making something up. Don't start yet, wait for it. And then I'm going to insert a draft here, which is, in this case, a literature review. So long as it's just a couple hundred words, and then I can easily digest this. If it's an entire paper of several thousand words, you may run into the token limit. But I'm going to add it here. And then based on that, ChatGPT is going to generate some verbal feedback. And theoretically, obviously, I would check this, but theoretically, I could see, okay, maybe this feedback, this suggested improvements would be helpful for the student, and then I can pass that on to them, right? So this now within a few seconds, of course, has generated some feedback, and this is all based on what I've already done, right? I'm not skipping, I'm not skipping any work here. I was the one who graded the rubric. I graded the paper. I'm just asking, can you offer some more verbal feedback, and then you can see how it does. I haven't experimented with this very much, but you can sort of see how it does, and then if it works, see if your students find it helpful. If it doesn't work, of course, either change the prompt or just give up. But these are the kinds of things that we can experiment with these days. I'm actually out of time. So thank you very much. I'm going to leave it at that, and I have to go to class myself.
Thank you so much, Dr. Daniel, for an informative session. We have a lot of comments, people thanking you for the session. So we just end it here. Thank you, everyone.